And they ruled our country for almost 200 years. We got independence in the year 1947. Though the Britishers started coming to our country in the 17th century itself, however, in 1757, with the Battle of Plassey, India became a colony of British Empire, right? Usse pehle Britishers were existing in our country as traders. However, in 1757, the British basically became the rulers of the country because they made India their colony. We need to understand that why did the British come to our country? After coming to our country, what changes were made by the British to our economy? And at the time when the British left our country, what was the state? What was the condition of Indian economy? Let us begin with understanding the reason behind the intrusion, the coming of British to our country. Children, around 1600, यानी 1600 के आसपास, the Industrial Revolution began in Britain. They wanted to make their own country an industrialized nation. And you know कि किसी भी country की industries की success के लिए दो चीजें बहुत जरूरी हैं. One, continuous supply of raw materials. And second, a market where the finished goods can be sold. अगर raw material की continuous supply ना हो तो industries चल नहीं पाएंगी. Similarly, अगर बने हुए सामान को बेचने के लिए market ना हो तो again industries नहीं चल पाएंगी. Therefore, for success of the industries, it was absolutely essential. It was absolutely necessary that they find sources from where they could get raw material. They find a place where they can sell their finished products. So in order to make industrial revolution in Britain successful, what the British did, they started exploring the places from where they could, fulfill these two purposes. So they started, their journey. पहले कुछ यूरोपियन कंट्रीज को उन्होंने अपनी कॉलोनी बनाया. उसके बाद while moving towards the African continent, उन्होंने अफ्रीका की बहुत सारी कंट्रीज को अपनी कॉलोनी बनाया. Then while moving from Europe, then Africa, and then while crossing the entire African continent, they moved to Asia. और जब वो एशिया आए तो the country which they came across was our country, India. Children, it was the period, it was the time when Mughal Empire had already declined. Mughal Empire का decline हो चुका था. Mughal Empire के जो strong rulers थे वो जा चुके थे. Bahadur Shah Zafar was the last ruler of British Empire who was quite weak. The country got disintegrated. Country was divided into small provinces. छोटे-छोटे हिस्सों में country divided थी. And the people, the rulers of these small provinces, there was infighting among these rulers. ये आपस में ही लड़ रहे. So the British found it a good opportunity, and they found that India is such a country that अगर हम अपनी बाकी सारी colonies lose भी कर दें तो कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. But India is such a country जहां से हमारी सारी जरूरतें पूरी हो जाएंगी. We would be able to extract raw materials from here because country was quite resourceful. Moreover, being a heavily populated country, they found it to be a good market also कि हम अपना बना हुआ सामान यहाँ आराम से बेच भी पाएंगे. That was the reason that finally in 1757, through Battle of Plassey, they conquered our country and they established India as their colony. Right? So that was a brief reason, or rather we can say a historical background of why the British come to our country. Now, once they came to our country, they established India as their colony. We need to understand that उन्होंने अलग-अलग spheres में, अलग-अलग parts में, अलग-अलग sectors में क्या-क्या changes किए. क्यों किए और उनका क्या इम्पैक्ट था. In order to analyze that, I would divide this chapter into 7 parts. मैं इस चैप्टर को 7 अलग अलग हिस्सों में डिवाइड कर रहा हूं in order to make it easily understandable. The very first part is economic growth during the British rule. Mind it, we need not talk about other aspects. हमें सिर्फ इकोनॉमिक एस्पेक्ट्स के बारे में ही डिस्कशन करनी है. तो हम इकोनॉमिक एस्पेक्ट्स को लेकर चलेंगे. सबसे पहले इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ, सेकंड वुड बी एग्रीकल्चर, थर्ड वुड बी इंडस्ट्रीज, फोर्थ वुड बी फॉरेन ट्रेड, देन डेमोग्राफी, occupational structure, and finally the infrastructure. These are the different 7 things which we will be analyzing one after the other. So let us begin first of all with the very first part of the chapter, that is economic growth. You all are aware what is economic growth. क्या होती है economic growth? Economic growth refers to rise in the country's GDP and rise in its per capita income, right? अगर कंट्री की जीडीपी और पर कैपिटा इनकम बढ़ रही है, लगातार बढ़ रही है, तो we say that economic growth is happening. Children, British ruled us for almost 200 years, but during this duration, no attempt was ever made by the British to know or to figure out or to find out the level of economic growth of India. It means that they were never interested in our economic growth. They were simply using India as a colony for developing their own nation. वो कभी इस बात में इंटरेस्टेड ही नहीं थे जानने में that हमारा जीडीपी बढ़ रहा है कि नहीं बढ़ रहा, whether the per capita income of country is rising or not rising, they were never interested. So not even a single attempt was ever made by the British during 200-year rule to know about the economic. However, there were few Indian economists, कुछ Indian economists थे, who were basically interested in knowing the level of economic growth of the country. The first one among them, सबसे पहले जो थे उनमें, he was दादा भाई नारोजी. He was the first person in India who ever made an attempt to know about the economic growth of our country. His attempt was done in the year 1870s and 80s. 1870 और 1880 के बीच में इन्होंने ये काम, he tried to figure out that what is the level of GDP. However, the British never permitted it, and therefore he did it secretively. As a result, his analysis was asynchronous in nature. That means it wasn't continuous, it was done over a very long period of time. And therefore, the results obtained from his analysis were not quite reliable. But a beginning was made. Apart from Dadabhai Naroji, there were other economists like R.C. Desai, William Digby, etc., who made attempts to measure GDP. लेकिन सबसे पहला attempt, scientific attempt, was done by Dr. V.K.R.V. Rao. A famous economist, Dr. V.K.R.V. Rao, in the year 1931, he made the first scientific attempt to measure the level of GDP in the country by collecting the data through the use of proper statistical tools. उन्होंने data इकट्ठा किया and he found that the GDP and per capita income of the country are very, very low. Country was living in the state of abject poverty. At the eve of independence, if I talk about at the eve of independence, जब हमारी country independent हुई, अगर हम उस time के data के हिसाब से देखें, तो GDP का जो growth rate था, it was less than 2% per annum. GDP was not even growing at a rate of 2% per annum. and per capita income was growing just at a rate of 0.5% per annum, only 0.5% per annum, which means that there was actually no growth happening. कोई growth थी ही नहीं. अगर GDP 2% के रेट से भी नहीं बढ़ रही, per capita income is not even increasing at a rate of 0.5% per annum, it would imply that the economy was a stagnant economy. इस तरह की इकोनॉमी थी स्टैग्नेंट इकोनॉमी, यानी एक ऐसी इकोनॉमी जिसमें कोई मूवमेंट नहीं है, कोई प्रोग्रेस नहीं है. The economy was a stagnant one wherein neither GDP nor per capita income were increasing, and therefore there was absence of economic growth even at the time of independence, even at the eve of independence. Children, is that clear to everyone or not?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So that was about first part. That
Sir,
is
इसमें जो
economic growth.
सर इसमें जो जीडीपी ग्रोथ रेट है ये इंडिपेंडेंस के टाइम का है या उससे पहले का है?
प्रज्ञा दोबारा बोलो.
सर इसमें जो जीडीपी का ग्रोथ रेट है सर वो इंडिपेंडेंस के टाइम का है या उससे पहले का है?
At the eve of independence, independence के time.
ओके ओके सर.
So that was about economic growth. I hope that this is clear. Let us move on to the coming section, second section. What is that? Agriculture. अब आते हैं दूसरे पार्ट पर जो कि क्या है? Agriculture. Now, agriculture has always been the backbone of Indian economy. शुरू से लेकर अब तक agriculture has always been the backbone of Indian economy. Even before the Britishers came to our country, India was an agrarian economy. Throughout the British rule, India remained an agrarian economy. At the eve of independence, India was an agrarian economy. And even after 75 years of independence, if I talk about it today, still India is primarily an agrarian economy because maximum population of the working force of the country still depends upon agriculture as a means of livelihood. Children, when the British came to our country at that time, almost 3/4 of the Indian workforce, yani almost 75% of Indian workforce was dependent upon agriculture as a means of livelihood. However, the agricultural sector was quite different. The way the British wanted it to be, from that, हमारा agricultural sector काफी अलग था. क्या अलग था? पहली बात तो हमारी कंट्री के अंदर the land settlement system that was prevailing, यानी खेती कौन करेगा? जिसकी जमीन है वही खेती करेगा. Right? As a result of it, the owners were cultivating the land. Mainly the food crops were being produced. The focus of agriculture was on production of wheat, on rice, maize, barley, etc. Majorly the food crops were being grown by farmers. The economy wasn't a market economy. Market economy nahi thi. Whatever was produced by the farmers, it was primarily used by them either for their own and their families' consumption, or even if some surplus was there, that was exchanged with others for satisfying the needs. Yani market economy wala culture nahi tha. The goods were not sold in the market, they were not purchased from the market. However, the British did not want the agricultural sector to function this way. I have already told you that British came here for a specific purpose. They wanted raw materials for their own industries. अपनी industries के लिए ब्रिटिशर्स को रॉ मटेरियल चाहिए थे. तो उन्होंने आने के बाद हमारे एग्रीकल्चरल सेक्टर में बहुत सारे चेंजेस किए. क्या क्या? फर्स्ट, चेंज इन द लैंड सेटलमेंट सिस्टम. सबसे पहला बदलाव जो किया, दैट वाज चेंज इन द लैंड सेटलमेंट सिस्टम. पहले क्या सिस्टम था? द ओनर विल बी द कल्टिवेटर. But now the government introduced the zamindari system. कैसा system लेकर के आई British government? Zamindari system. Now, what was zamindari system? Under this system, the entire ownership of the land of the country was taken up by the government. गवर्नमेंट ने कहा अब किसी की जमीन नहीं है, जमीन सरकार की है, यानी द ब्रिटिश गवर्नमेंट इज नाउ द ओनर ऑफ द लैंड and the British government will get the land cultivated from the farmers. But then the British officials were quite less in number, so what did they do? उन्होंने एक मीडिएटर अपॉइंट किया, या तो ब्रिटिश या फिर जो इंडियन लॉयल थे ब्रिटिश के, उनको ही जमींदार बनाए. जमींदार का मतलब they were given the right to get the land cultivated, यानी जमीन सरकार की रहेगी, and zamindar would be a person appointed by the government who was entrusted with the task of getting the land cultivated from the farmers. Whatever would be the output produced from the land, a part of that would be given to the government as tax, and the remaining, the zamindar would decide what is to be done. So that was the first kind of change. The people lost the ownership rights of the land. Now, agriculture was a main source of revenue for the British government. However, neither the British nor these Indian zamindars did anything for the improvement of agricultural sector. और उसका main reason क्या था? Second change, revenue settlement system. What was revenue settlement system? British government ने deadlines fix की हुई थी, dates, that you need to deposit the tax with the government within so and so time period. And if the zamindar would fail to meet that deadline, there was a risk of losing zamindari. Yani he could lose the privileges he has got from the government. Now, nobody would like to lose the privileges. And that is why zamindars were also quite cruel, quite brutal, and, quite strict with the farmers with respect to collection of revenues and output.
Sir,
Right? Third change that was done by the British, तीसरा बदलाव जो उन्होंने किया, that was commercialization of agriculture. The third thing the British did was commercialization of agriculture. Now, what do I mean when I say that the British commercialized the agriculture? They developed the culture of market economy. That means they forced the farmers to produce the output not for the purpose of their own consumption, but for the purpose of selling the output in the market. And they also forced the farmers to shift from food crops to cash crops. यानी एक तरीके से डेवलपमेंट ऑफ मार्केट इकोनॉमी हम कह सकते हैं. दिस इज what the farmer the British did to our agricultural sector. उन्होंने farmers को force किया that they should stop producing food crops and should start producing cash crops. Food crops like wheat, rice, which the farmers were already growing. Cash crops like cotton, jute, indigo, opium, इस तरह के goods which were required by the British industries. जो उनकी industries में goods चाहिए थे, those goods, the British forced the farmers to produce such kind of goods. Right, so that was another change that was done by the British. Children, in spite of the fact that, ऐसा मैंने अभी बताया आपको, that agriculture was the main source of revenue for the British government, there was no development of agricultural infrastructure. ना तो कोई नई टेक्निक इंट्रोड्यूस की ब्रिटिशर्स ने, ना ही modern ways of irrigation. That means the farmers were still dependent upon the traditional, conventional ways of agriculture, the same pair of bullock, the same dependence upon rainfall for the purpose of irrigation. So there was no development of agricultural infrastructure under the British rule. Another characteristic of agricultural sector was low productivity. हालांकि ब्रिटिश रूल में प्रोडक्शन अंडर एग्रीकल्चर इंक्रीज्ड. अब आप कहोगे प्रोडक्टिविटी कम हो गई, लेकिन प्रोडक्शन कैसे बढ़ गई? प्रोडक्शन इंक्रीज्ड बिकॉज मोर लैंड वाज ब्रॉट अंडर कल्टीवेशन. ब्रिटिशर्स के आने से पहले जितना लैंड अंडर कल्टीवेशन था, ब्रिटिशर्स एक्चुअली, यस
सर कोई पूछना चाह रहा है कुछ.
हाँ जी,
सर आवाज आ रही है आपको?
यस वेदांग, आई कैन हियर यू।
सर आई एम यश।
हाँ यश, बोलो।
सर आप हाँ सर, स्क्रीन की दिक्कत थी सर, दिख नहीं रहा था।
मुझे समझ नहीं आ रहा क्या कह रहे हो।
सर आप थोड़ा कैमरा अपनी तरफ ले लो, स्क्रीन
अच्छा,
अच्छा।
कैमरा, ओके ओके ओके,
थैंक यू सर।
ऑलराइट। मैं थोड़ा सा स्क्रीन छोटी कर देता हूँ, आई थिंक दैट वुड बी बेटर। वेट, आई थिंक इट वुड बी बेटर नाउ।
Yes, sir.
हाँ, ठीक है। सो आई वाज सेइंग दैट प्रोडक्टिविटी एग्रीकल्चरल सेक्टर में कम थी। व्हाट डज इट मीन? क्योंकि कोई मॉडर्न वेज ऑफ इरिगेशन नहीं, ड्यू टू कंटिन्यूअस ग्रोइंग ऑफ कैश क्रॉप्स द लैंड वाज लूजिंग इट्स फर्टिलिटी। The land on which once indigo or opium was grown, used to become barren. एक बार जिस जमीन पर आप नील की खेती कर दोगे, अफीम की खेती कर दोगे, वो जमीन बंजर हो जाती थी। What does it mean? Productivity was quite low. However, the production increased. How did the production increase? Production increased because more land was brought under cultivation. तो इस सब से हम समझ सकते हैं, जो भी मैंने अभी तक आपको एग्रीकल्चरल सेक्टर में बताया, दिस ऑल शोज दैट ना तो कोई इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चरल डेवलपमेंट, ना कोई टेक्नोलॉजिकल डेवलपमेंट। इसका मतलब द इकोनॉमी वाज अ बैकवर्ड इकोनॉमी। कैसी इकोनॉमी थी? बैकवर्ड। At the eve of independence, country was a backward economy. Moreover, because zamindari system Britishers ne introduced kiya, so it was like a feudalistic economy. We can say that India became a semi-feudal economy under the British rule. There were feudal lords in the form of zamindars, and the people who were cultivating were acting as peasants, right? Bonded laborers, slaves, who were just working at the instructions of the zamindars or the British government. So that was about agricultural sector. I hope it is clear to all of you.
Yes, sir.
यस सर।
All right.
Say-
Let me now talk about the
Say-
third head. I'm doing away with this. I hope people would
सर
have
एक
noted.
मिनट, गिव मी अ मोमेंट।
हाँ प्रज्ञा बोलो। हाँ जी,
सर ये सेमी फ्यूडल इकोनॉमी कैसे हुई?
देखो फ्यूडलिस्टिक इकोनॉमी किसे कहते हैं प्रज्ञा? जहां पर एक फ्यूडल लॉर्ड होता है और पेजेंट्स होते हैं जो उस फ्यूडल लॉर्ड की इंस्ट्रक्शंस पर काम करते हैं। Now, under the British rule, हालांकि feudalistic system नहीं था, but it was very similar to feudalistic system. Zamindars were behaving like feudal lords only, and they were forcing the farmers to cultivate the land according to their whims and fancies. यानी farmers को अपनी मेहनत का कुछ मिलता भी नहीं था. They were simply working on the instructions of the zamindars. It means that the characteristic of the economy was very similar to that of feudalistic economy, and that is why we call it as a semi-feudal system, right?
ओके सर।
I hope you all have noted this. मैं मिटा रहा हूं इसे. Children, the third thing which we need to do is about industries. बहुत सारे लोगों को लगता होगा that Britishers के आने से पहले तो we were totally agrarian and there was no question of industries in our country. However, surprisingly, even before the Britishers came to our country, we were renowned across the world for our industrial sector. हालांकि मेनली हमारी इकोनॉमी एग्रेरियन ही थी, लेकिन उसके बावजूद हमारी इंडस्ट्रीज, खासकर हैंडीक्राफ्ट इंडस्ट्रीज, हमारा जो मसलिन क्लॉथ था यानी मलमल का कपड़ा, दैट वाज नोन अक्रॉस द वर्ल्ड. सिमिलरली हमारी जेम्स एंड ज्वेलरी इंडस्ट्री, दिस वाज आल्सो नोन. इसके अलावा हमारे मेटल वेयर यानी कॉपर और ब्रास के बर्तन, they were also quite known across the world. We were known for the craftsmanship and we were known for the quality of raw material. जिस तरह का हम रॉ मटेरियल इस्तेमाल करते थे, जिस तरह का क्राफ्ट्समैनशिप था इंडिया का, इट वाज अनमैच्ड इन द वर्ल्ड. सो हम अच्छे खासे इंडस्ट्रियलाइज्ड नेशन थे बिफोर द ब्रिटिश केम टू आवर कंट्री. But Britishers came again. Remember, they came with a special motive. They wanted to make Britain, they wanted to make England an industrially developed nation. अगर हमारी अपनी इंडस्ट्रीज चलती रहती तो उन्हें रॉ मटेरियल मिल नहीं पाता, उनका बना हुआ सामान यहां बिक नहीं पाता. That is why what did the British do? They systematically de-industrialized our nation. What did the British do? They systematically de-industrialized the Indian economy. उन्होंने हमारी कंट्री को de-industrialize किया for twin objectives. दो ऑब्जेक्टिव जो मैं आपको शुरू में बता चुका हूं, वो दो ऑब्जेक्टिव्स कौन कौन से थे? First, to use India as a supplier of raw material to the upcoming British industries. And second, to use India as a sprawling market for the finished goods of the British industries. They wanted India to act as a supplier of the raw material. That was first objective. And second, they wanted to use India as a market for the finished goods of the British industries. अगर हमारी अपनी इंडस्ट्रीज चलती रहती तो ना तो उन्हें रॉ मटेरियल मिलता और ना ही उनका बना हुआ सामान यहाँ बिकता. So what did they do? They systematically de-industrialized our country. कैसे? They started dumping their cheap products, right? उनके जो cheap products थे, they started dumping their products in the Indian market, right? And the Indians got deviated from their own products towards the British products. As a result, gradually Indian goods की demand market में कम होने लगी, Indian industries धीरे धीरे बंद हो गई और country की industries खत्म हो गई. अब इसके दो consequences हुए. One, the people who were engaged in industrial sector, they became unemployed. And because of the reason that a person cannot remain unemployed for a long period of time, they all moved towards agricultural sector. Yani during the British rule, the dependence of the population on agricultural sector increased. जब Britishers आए थे उस टाइम पर 75% of the population was dependent upon agriculture. But during the mid-19th century, यानी 1850-55 आते आते, almost 85% of the population was now dependent upon agriculture. क्योंकि जो लोग पहले industrial sector में engaged थे, they also drifted and now they were dependent upon agriculture. This is exactly what the Britishers wanted. They wanted more people to be engaged in agriculture so that they can get more raw materials for the British industries. And second consequence was क्योंकि अपनी industries हमारी खत्म हो गई, so now we had no option but to buy the British made products. Yani demand for British products increased. Right? So they were able to succeed in getting, the twin objective achieved. So that was about the initial part of the industrial sector. Yani Britishers ने हमारे ऊपर लगभग 200 साल रूल किया. उसमें से पहले 100 साल की कहानी तो ये है कि उन्होंने हमारा इंडस्ट्रियल सेक्टर खत्म किया. कैसे खत्म किया मैंने आपको बताया, और उसके इफेक्ट क्या हुए ये भी मैंने आपको बताया, और क्यों खत्म किया ये भी बताया. However, in the second half of the British rule, see, especially after the first revolt of independence, remember 1857 में हमारी कंट्री में पहला रिवोल्ट हुआ ब्रिटिश गवर्नमेंट के अगेंस्ट. हालांकि ब्रिटिशर्स ने उस रिवोल्ट को सप्रेस कर दिया, लेकिन दे न्यू दैट नाउ वी नीड टू प्रिटेंड प्रो इंडियन. हमें दिखाना पड़ेगा कि हम इंडिया के फेवर में, अदरवाइज हमारी यहाँ अब बहुत ज्यादा चलने वाली नहीं. So what did they do? They started permitting the establishment of few industries, light consumer good industries in India. उन्होंने परमिट किया कि अगर आप चाहें, इंडियंस को बोला तो आप इंडस्ट्रीज एस्टेब्लिश कर सकते हैं, लाइट कंज्यूमर गुड इंडस्ट्रीज. तो शुरुआत में कॉटन इंडस्ट्रीज एंड जूट इंडस्ट्रीज केम अप इन पार्ट्स ऑफ इंडिया. कॉटन इंडस्ट्रीज इन द वेस्टर्न पार्ट्स ऑफ द कंट्री, जिसको आज हम महाराष्ट्र और गुजरात जानते हैं, और जूट इन द ईस्टर्न पार्ट्स ऑफ द कंट्री, जिसको आज की डेट में हम वेस्ट बंगाल या बांग्लादेश, जो कि स्प्लिट हो गया इंडिपेंडेंस के टाइम पर, वो एरिया, राइट. तो जूट इंडस्ट्रीज केम अप इन द ईस्टर्न पार्ट्स ऑफ द नेशन, कॉटन इंडस्ट्री स्टार्टेड कमिंग अप इन द वेस्टर्न पार्ट्स ऑफ द नेशन, और उसके अलावा कुछ और लाइट कंज्यूमर गुड इंडस्ट्रीज लाइक शुगर इंडस्ट्रीज, पेपर इंडस्ट्रीज and cement industries also came up. However, the magnitude of the damage which the British did to our economy was too much. And whatever additional they did, whatever permissions they granted, was not sufficient to make up for that damage. One more thing, the British never permitted the establishment of capital good industries in our country. They never allowed production of machinery, equipment, etc. in our nation, because they never wanted India to be an independent nation. They never wanted that India should become independent. They always wanted that India should remain totally dependent upon them. India unke upar dependent rahe. They wanted this. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So we
Yes,
can
sir.
understand that जितना उन्होंने हमारी कंट्री को नुकसान पहुंचाया वो बहुत ज्यादा था. बाद में भले ही उन्होंने इंडस्ट्रीज एस्टेब्लिश करने के लिए परमिशन दी, लेकिन उसमें भी they never permitted capital good industries establishment because they never wanted our country to be an independent nation. So that was about industrial sector, which again proves that हमारी कंट्री एक backward economy थी, एक de-industrialized economy थी at the time of independence.